Welcome to episode 3 of my beginner's guide to N-scale railroading. Today we're going to go over all of the things you need to consider before buying your first DCC system. Alrighty, before you go out and purchase your first DCC system, there are a few things that you really want to consider. In general, I believe it's probably the best practice to kind of do the buy once, cry once type situation when it comes to your DCC system. You're going to want to get something the first time that is going to grow with you and be a good investment in the long run. You can find yourself tied up in an ecosystem and it isn't necessarily what you want it to be, so I think it's probably a good idea to really research it before you jump into that. A lot of people will just go out and buy the first thing that they see, or in some cases what all the club members use, and that's not a bad idea either. Generally, if you're around a place that has a club, having the same hardware as them can be beneficial for you. Not only that, there's going to be a lot of people that can help you with any questions you might have. So what do I think is the first thing that you really need to consider? And honestly, before you even consider your budget, you probably need to put together a track plan for what you want to start with and kind of where you want to be. Most people kind of plan on upgrading a little bit into the future, and that's a good thing to do. It can make this a little more financially feasible, but you kind of need to have an idea where you want to go. This might change in the future, but if you're limited to, say, the 30 by 80 door core layout, or a 4 by 8 sheet kind of like I am, that can drastically change what you might consider using versus somebody that is running, a 10-12 foot shelf layout where they're doing switching and operations. That's kind of a different situation, and you're going to be considering different DCC systems. So first and foremost, I think it's important to have a decent idea of what kind of layout that you want to be running in the near future. With that said, there's going to be a couple people that are coming to this video. There are the newbies that don't have any experience in this. They probably don't have any track or anything like that. And then there's the guys that have been running DC for a while and they're considering making the shift to DCC. I will get to the latter in just a few minutes when we talk about the new DCC systems. But for the most part, when we are thinking about building these layouts as newbies, I would recommend that you stay away from traditional track. And what I mean by traditional track is what you used to see in hobby stores, Atlas, Pico, that type of thing, where there's no road bed attached to the rail. It's just ties and rail. Now you can get these in pre-cut pieces with defined curves and that type of stuff. Problem is, for temporary layouts, they can be difficult to assemble and keep together. There's also different codes of rail, which means the height of the actual rail itself, and they need to be put together in a specific way to make sure that you have a nice smooth transition for your engines and rolling stock. And for the beginner, that can be a little bit tedious, not to mention for a possible teardown layout, temporary layout, it can make things a little bit more difficult. So usually when you are talking to a beginner that wants to get into this, we are looking at Bachmann EZ Command or Kato Unitrack. And what are the pros and cons of each? Now, I'm not a hater of Bachmann EZ Command by any means. As a matter of fact, when I first started, that's generally what I had. Even back in my youth when I was running HO trains, it was Bachmann EZ Command. It's something that you hear and you automatically assume is kind of the beginner's type of thing. And they have a good history of being a beginner's railroading company. However, in this particular case, I am going to probably push you away from using Bachmann EZ Command and more towards using Kato Unitrack. If you have no experience building layouts, I would highly suggest finding access to a computer and downloading AnyRail 6. That is the program that I prefer. I have paid for it. I used it to build the layout that you see behind you, as well as the layout that I built preceding this one. It's a relatively powerful program. The free version is more than capable of helping a beginner set up kind of an initial layout. It's not going to do a whole room complex, but it'll certainly do a relatively simple 4x8 sheet type layout. So I recommend that everybody download that and try it. There are other options out there and available, such as SCARM, and there are a few other ones that I'm unaware of, but I've heard rumblings of them on the internet. You can also kind of hand draw just to get an idea, but AnyRail is really good for playing with different track libraries. They have pretty much everything out there already in the system. It's properly scaled, and you can build kind of a layout to a scaled sheet of paper. And this allows you to play with the traditional track. It also allows you to pull up the track libraries for Bachmann and Kato. And if you do that, you're going to notice something almost immediately. The Bachmann list is about this long, and the Kato list is this long. And so what that means to the newbie is there are a whole bunch of different options and capabilities when you're running Kato Unitrack. Now you can put together a pretty reasonable small layout running Bachmann EZ Track. You have a couple different radiuses you can work with and a few different turnout types. However, I found it difficult to get complex shapes to come back together and meet the way they need to because you can't really mess with EZ Track. It kind of has to be the angle and shape that it's set up to be. For anyone who has never seen it, this is, get this in front of my face so it focuses, Bachmann EZ Track. It has kind of the little clips on each end, and this is kind of a typical radius like you would get in a starter set. The ties are relatively deep, and the road bed is kind of a plasticky texture, but it does kind of pass the sniff test. You can easily ballast Bachmann EZ Track because the ties are substantially deeper than, say, Kato Track. It's a whole lot easier to do ballasting without it getting up into the rails and possibly into the drive mechanisms of your engines. So that is one of the plus sides to using Bachmann EZ Track. When we're talking about Kato, this is generally what a stick of Kato track looks like. You can get this in just about any length that you can imagine. And this is a radius that you get. And again, you can get it in just about any radius you can imagine. Kato also has the ability to buy parallel pieces of track, so you can get straight pieces that are hooked together. It's called double track. And you can get corners for like double track main that are put together and the radiuses match one another. And that's a big deal because trying to find radiuses that run parallel to each other in various pieces of track or trying to do it yourself can be really difficult. Also, the double track that you get from Kato has super elevation. So the train has a little bit of an arc going around the corner. Not really the biggest deal in N scale. They're more than capable of handling all the curves basically at any speed that an N scale can run reasonably. However, it gives it a more realistic look. When you go out on the rails, in real life, you're going to see super elevation on most of your high-speed track. So just kind of one of those things that is neat to see. Lots of different turnouts with Kato Unitrack, and both of them honestly are relatively DCC friendly. All the turnouts for the most part are DCC routing, meaning the power will kind of follow where you have the switch set to. In yards, this isn't the biggest deal, but switchbacks and things like that can be a little bit more difficult to deal with, but that's kind of a more advanced DCC type situation. With all of the track out of the way, there's another thing you kind of want to consider. If you are doing a layout that you are kind of setting up for the time being, I call this the kitchen table layout, and you do eventually want a decent permanent layout, you might even consider doing traditional rail at that point, you're going to have a whole lot easier time reselling your Kato and not losing as much money. The resale value is substantially better with Unitrack versus Bachmann EZ Track. mainly because Kato has this reputation for building bulletproof stuff. And for the most part, that is the case. Kato rail tends to work just a little bit better than Bachmann EZ Command. Now, I do have a little bit of a caveat there. I have noticed, and this may be just me, it seems to me that Kato Unitrack gets a little bit dirtier, just a little bit faster than Bachmann EZ Command. And if you're looking at Kato Unitrack, it is relatively tall compared to some of the other rails. So I want to say it's code 90. I can't remember. It's either code 80 or 90. So that's basically like mainline rail everywhere. Bachmann EZ Command is a little bit shorter. Also has kind of the lips like you would see on traditional rail. So it has a slightly more realistic look in that respect. But honestly, both of them pass muster at just a little bit of distance. So you're not going to lose any realism by running either Bachmann EZ Command or Kato Unitrack. So my little rant about what type of track you want to get and why you want to do it first is now behind us. So what kind of DCC system would I consider buying if I was going to start over? Well, this is where knowing the type of layout is going to drastically change your possible first buy into DCC. There's basically 3 types of setups you can buy. There is a command station throttle all-in-one, something similar to this DCS51. There are command stations and throttles that have to be plugged in to the system. The command station can be located somewhere on your layout, and you have to put in physical connection points to plug your throttle in and control your locomotives. And then there are the newer, more modern wireless systems that still generally require a command station to be somewhere on your layout. And then you can wirelessly connect to that anywhere. So all 3 of these kind of have their advantages. If you are running a relatively small layout and you don't necessarily need to have control of your DCC system everywhere on the layout, like for me, this is a 4x8 layout. There was a period of time when I just had a DCS51 kind of centrally located, and it allowed me to do everything I needed to do. Should I need to shut the power off, I'd shut it off here, go rescue a locomotive, do whatever. However, if my layout was 12, 15 feet long and I was switching down on the far end and needed to take one, couple of tank cars down to the far end for a switching routine or what have you, it would be pretty difficult to do that if I only had a command station throttle combo. So there are a few options, like I said. The command station throttle combos, there's 2 major ones that I know of out on the market right now. There are the DCS52 and the ECOS cab control. Now the DCS52 is very similar to this. It just has a more modern LCD screen up in the top right hand corner. That LCD screen is important. It gives you all of your locomotive information as well as functions that you have active, that type of stuff, as well as locomotive speed should you not go by the physical throttle you have here. It also has a forward and reverse switch just like this. The ECOS cab control is a duplex throttle. It allows you to simultaneously run 2 locomotives separately with 2 different throttles. It's substantially larger than this, and it's also a whole lot more expensive. I also don't necessarily recommend it for N scale, at least currently. The power supplies tend to run a little bit of high voltage, and they're really more suited for HO scale. Now there is one other option out there that I just do not recommend. And again, I have no problem with Bachmann. I think they make some decent stuff. But their entry into the DCC system is a little lacking. It essentially looks like a DC controller, just it's a little bit wider. But it doesn't have a physical readout or any of that type of thing, so you don't know what functions you have active. You don't know what locomotive you have pulled up. It's just lacking a lot of features. Really not going to grow real well with any type of layout. So I would recommend staying away from the Digitrax option, or not, excuse me, the Bachmann option for your DCC controller. Now in the command station side of things, where you have a little box that you hide somewhere on your layout or underneath and wire in your throttle separately, there are some real big players in that market. Currently, I think NCE probably has the majority of the market share there. You go to a lot of clubs, you're probably going to see NCE Power Cab systems. So again, if you have a local club that you're working with, look into the system that they're running, because more than likely you're probably going to want to buy into that same system. But the NCE Power Cab is a relatively affordable option. All these tend to run about $200 for the starter sets. The NCE Power Cab has a command station and kind of a T-shaped throttle. It has a readout up top and a roller knob, like a thumb wheel, kind of like on your mouse, that will control the locomotive throttle, as well as good tactile buttons for using the functions. MRC also makes something really similar. The throttle looks very much the same, other than at the bottom there is a physical rotational potentiometer that allows you to control the throttle. A lot of this comes down to ergonomics and the type of throttle control you want to have. And then on the far end is the Digitrax Zephyr system. I want to say their entry level is the DCS 210 Plus. It is a command station. It will function with the DCS 52. Everything that is LocoNet kind of can talk to one another through their LocoNet bus. As well as you can plug the throttle for that particular unit into one of these and have it function as well. I believe it comes with a duplex throttle, the DT602. I think you can get a single channel throttle as well for it, but the kit generally comes with a duplex throttle. And honestly, that is something that I had for a long time. The duplex throttle is really worth the extra money. Being able to jump between two locomotives really can save you, and it makes it a whole lot easier for setting up consists. That one tends to be a little bit more expensive. I want to say they're about $350. TCS also has a new offering. I haven't seen it in a whole lot of systems, but it's really more for a smaller layout. It has a small power supply and just a physical connection, and the actual throttle itself works as a command station when it's plugged in, and it's about $260. As we move into the higher end stuff, the Digitrax system that we just talked about, the DCS 210 Plus, and then like the 240 Plus, there are wireless options that you can get for that. Now they work on IR, and they would allow you to run a much larger layout without having to be plugged into all of these physical connection points. That can be something that you might find attractive. There's also the ESU cab control. Same problem that I have with the ECOS. I don't think it's really built for N scale. I think the minimum voltage is still a little bit too high. But I will tell you that the system that it uses, the controller, the knob on it is really top quality, and it'll kind of ruin you for other DCC systems. It is a nice system, and they really have it functioning spot on now. There are a few updates into it, and it really does function well. The other thing that you might consider is the TCS CS105 command station with one of their throttles. It's also going to be on a little bit higher price point, closer to $700 to $800. So, kind of depending on where you want to be, you're gonna be looking at spending some money on your first DCC system, anywhere from $200 on up to $800 to $1,000 for a good DCC system. That might seem overwhelming, and it definitely is. But really, you can get by with a good $200 DCC system for quite some time. And honestly, most of them are relatively upgradable. It just kind of depends on how much freedom you want to have. Do you want to spend the money to put jacks in all over the place? At some point, it makes sense to just buy a wireless system. Or are you considering staying on a small layout? And something like this is more than enough to run a couple of locomotives, do a bit of switching work, and just enjoy your hobby. So to start with, what would I personally recommend for the guys that are doing the the door 30 by 80 or a 4 by 8 layout, I really think the DCS 52 is one of the better options on the market. On sale, you can get it for about $180, and it does allow you to hook up a lot of different things through the LocoNet system of components. Hook up to a computer using a LocoNet bus. You can hook up a whole bunch of different throttles, even to one of these should you want to have an extra one. And honestly, the access points are relatively affordable should you want a couple of access points on your layout. NCE would be my secondary option. There's a reason why a lot of clubs use it. It's simple, it's easy, and it's pretty much bulletproof. It just happens to be a little bit more expensive off the get-go. So now, if you are into a bigger layout, when you're starting to consider a room size layout, or you already are in the DC ecosystem and you have a large layout and a big roster of engines, personally, I would buy once, cry once, and get yourself the CS105. And I'm honestly leaning probably more towards the UT50 throttle. It is almost as good as the UTW100 in some respects, but the potentiometer version has some features that will really make you enjoy your hobby, as well as the ease of setting up lighting in your consist and getting prototypical lights working. It really is top quality when it comes to that stuff. So if you're already kind of invested in a big layout and you're looking to upgrade to DCC, I think the TCS option is the way to go.